A decorated RAF Wing Commander is shot down and thrown into a brutal Japanese POW camp where his capture is meant to be a slow, humiliating death. His tormentor, a sadistic colonel, forces him into a series of deadly spectacles, unaware the pilot is a master of the forbidden martial arts, a skill so lethal the colonel recognizes his master. The colonel wanted to break a man, but instead, he's about to face a war he never saw coming. The film opens in 1950 with James Wright arriving at the Ito Dojo, a place of martial arts discipline, and stepping inside without removing his shoes, an immediate and blatant sign of disrespect to the students diligently training around him. He demands to speak with the master about the man in the photograph, Benjiro Ito, who once commanded a brutal prison camp and held a personal, violent history with James. The current master, Shunsuke Ito, is immediately wary of James's presence, telling him that his father, who shared tales of the prisoner's controversial fighting style, had warned that the foreigner's presence brings dishonor to the family's name. In a bold show of force, the master commands his students to confront the unwelcome visitor, but James moves with remarkable speed and skill, defeating all of them in a blur of motion in mere seconds. The fight is brutally precise, forcing the master to call off his men, intrigued by the stranger's powerful technique and demanding to know the true purpose of his visit. Before James can reveal his answer, the narrative shifts sharply backward in time to 1942 amidst the crushing chaos of World War II's Battle of Bataan and the collapsing Allied front in the Philippines. Here we find James Wright, a decorated Royal Air Force Wing Commander, serving with the Allied forces, when his aircraft is struck down during an intense air engagement, sending him crashing deep into enemy territory. Barely surviving the impact, he pulls his fallen comrade's body from the wreckage and buries it with his own hands, but the brief moment of peace is shattered as Japanese soldiers begin sweeping the jungle, hunting for any surviving enemies. James tries to trick them with a tossed stone and launches a surprise attack, but the overwhelming numbers of the Japanese force him to run until they finally catch him. Outnumbered and caught in a final act of defiance, he hurls a knife, but the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Benjiro Ito, stops his men from killing the pilot, instead ordering them to take the British soldier alive. James is dragged to a grim prisoner of war camp where Allied soldiers face forced labor, starvation, and daily brutality under Ito's cruel command. Immediately recognizing that James is no ordinary captive, Ito orders his right-hand man, Captain Hirano, to take James and two other trusted soldiers into the forest and execute him quietly, away from the others. However, in a desperate act of survival, James, a man used to giving orders, dodges the executioner's sword with lightning precision, fighting back fiercely and killing Hirano and his soldiers in a blur of motion. After dispatching them, he makes a frantic escape into the dense jungle, where he stumbles upon the wreckage of a crashed plane he had seen before. But before he can find a way out of enemy territory, he falls into a hidden trap and is recaptured. The soldiers eagerly drag him back to camp, presenting the man who dared to kill their comrades to a cold and unyielding Colonel Ito. Ito examines James closely, ripping the dog tag from his neck, and confiscates a hidden medal for heroism from his belt, proof of the prisoner's courage and status, before ominously promising him death by the following day. Later that night, one of the guards suggests killing the defiant prisoner while he sleeps, but Ito refuses, wanting the entire camp to witness what happens when a man defies him, making James a public lesson in fear and control. Inside his cramped holding cell, James meets a small group of other prisoners, including American Captain Collins and Filipino Sergeant Gabriel Villanueva, who inform him about the camp's inhumane rules and the constant threat of being transferred to the far worse March of Death prison. The next morning, the guards drag James into the center of the yard for the spectacle of punishment, where two prisoners are first brutalized for stealing a ration of food and forced to fight the camp's top fighter, a massive man whose strikes are meant to break every prisoner's spirit. After the brutal display, the crowd waits for the final act, the death of James Wright, who is pitted against the camp's top fighter, Koji, whom he is not supposed to have a chance against. Yet, within seconds, James drops the massive man with just two precise strikes, utilizing the forbidden martial arts techniques he'd learned in Hong Kong, leaving the entire camp in stunned silence. The colonel, initially silent, turns and walks back to his tent, but his aide argues that James shouldn't be spared, that a man like him should suffer until his final breath. Ito, however, now intrigued, realizes that the martial art techniques are forbidden and even recognizes the master martial artist who trained James. He changes his decision to execution and orders that James be taken to the barracks to rest, promising his aide that the British officer's time will still come soon enough. Later, James is summoned by Ito's men and taken to the colonel's office, where he encounters a young woman named Teresa, who has been captured and forced to work as a nurse for the Japanese soldiers. Curious about James's formidable fighting skills, Ito immediately questions him about the source of his training in the forbidden techniques, wanting to know the identity of the master who taught him. However, James remains completely tight-lipped about his past and his teacher, refusing to divulge any information that might put others at risk. In a chilling display of power and control, Ito threatens James with certain death by the next day and orders his men to take him away from the tent. When morning comes, the colonel stages another fight, knowing that James's style is not meant for multiple opponents, and sends 3 of his strongest men against him in a brutal combat. Yet, James moves like a storm, disarming and flooring all 3 men in under a minute. When the final blow could have ended their lives, James hesitates, refusing to kill, which only serves to infuriate the colonel. Moments later, the sharp crack of gunfire echoes through the camp. Ito, refusing to tolerate such humiliation and refusal to kill, orders the immediate execution of the defeated fighters, reminding every prisoner that mercy was not part of the camp's rules. Realizing that they are running out of time before they are transferred to a worse prison, James devises a daring plan to steal a radio from the watchtower and call for help. During their daily labor, James and his fellow prisoners create a chaotic diversion among the workers, drawing the guards away from their posts. Seizing the opportunity, James sprints toward the tower, climbs to the top, and manages to pill for the radio before hiding it among the sandbags. Just as he prepares to leave, the nurse, Teresa, spots him, but when a soldier attempts to harass her, she takes a slap across the face for her silence, refusing to betray his presence. The next day, Lieutenant Colonel Ito convenes an unplanned assembly, determined to find out who had dared to attempt an escape, reminding the prisoners that any attempt to flee will be met with severe punishment. To underscore his point, he publicly punishes those he suspects of harboring escape plans, but James remains undeterred. He resolves to break free that very night, slipping out of the barracks and into the jungle, leaving a clever dummy in his bed to evade detection during the routine check. For the first time in months, James steps beyond the camp's fence and moves through the jungle until he reaches the coast, meticulously scouting for a location where he could make contact for support. There, through the static of the stolen radio, he suddenly hears voices speaking Navajo, the secret code used by American troops, which immediately reveals that Allied forces were much closer than they thought. Upon returning, he shares his findings with the other prisoners, emphasizing the urgent need for someone who can communicate in code to reach out to the American forces. The following day, Ito summons James once more, having also overheard the strange transmissions, and probes whether the pilot understands the Navajo language that might have been heard near their territory. James feigns complete ignorance, which only serves to infuriate the colonel. In a fit of rage, Ito declares that no prisoner will ever see their family again, and then binds James to poles, ordering several men to beat him mercilessly until he drops to his knees. Blooded and battered, James manages to draw on his last reserves of strength, striking back with precision and taking the guards down one by one, right in front of Ito. Watching his own men fall to a half-conscious prisoner is a humiliation the colonel cannot tolerate. Seething with fury, Ito executes several innocent prisoners on the spot and commands his second-in-command to knock James unconscious, ensuring he stays alive for now, but only to face something far worse than death. James finally regains consciousness 2 days later in the infirmary, his body unable to withstand the savage beating he received, where his wounds are being tended to by Teresa, the young nurse he had seen before. Teresa, trapped in the camp much like the prisoners, explains that James is the first captive to receive such special treatment, a strange indication of his luck amidst their dire circumstances. Just as James begins to ask her questions, a Japanese soldier enters, abruptly breaking the silence and forcing them apart without a word. Later that night, James lies on his cot when the sudden crack of gunfire shatters the silence, and he opens his eyes to see Colonel Ito standing before him, conducting another public execution to remind everyone what happens to those who try to escape. Amid the chaos, the colonel's true motive finally becomes clear. Every brutal test, every arranged fight, had been part of a dark ritual of honor. Ito didn't want him to die in secret, but to perish in a fair combat that honored the forbidden techniques he'd been taught. James, battered but unbroken, offers a defiant response, warning Ito that if these were his best fighters, then he was sure to make it home alive. Ito's expression hardens as he warns James that if Japan loses the war, he will choose the path of a kamikaze, making sure every prisoner perishes with him so that no one from the camp will ever leave to tell the tale. When James finally returns to the barracks, his friends are waiting with a glimmer of hope, telling him that American planes had flown overhead, dropping thousands of leaflets that warned the Japanese soldiers of coming justice for their crimes. But James's face remains hard as he tells them what Ito had said, that the colonel plans to destroy everyone if Japan falls, confirming that their time is running out. That very night, James and Gabriel slip away, moving through the jungle toward the coast to try and contact the US forces, using a jumble of languages to mask their requests for help from any patrols. Their plan is bold and desperate. They will fire a signal rocket so a passing plane can spot them, then have that aircraft tow the intact glider James had found in the forest, their only shot at leaving that cursed place alive. When they return to the barracks after sending the signal, the place is completely empty, and before they can react, a group of soldiers bursts in and strikes them down, knocking them unconscious. They wake moments later to the deafening roar of airplane engines thundering low across the sky as the long-awaited US assault begins, with explosions echoing across the island. In the midst of the turmoil, the prisoners are tied up as chaos erupts, and Colonel Ito, losing control, begins executing both soldiers and prisoners alike. James realizes they need to reach the radio tower, since the stolen radio was smashed during the attack, to re-establish contact with the US forces. The nurses, showing unexpected courage, decide to act, distracting a guard, luring him close, and killing him with their own hands, clearing the way for James and Gabriel to climb the tower. At the top, Gabriel immediately starts sending an SOS signal, but below, the Japanese soldiers begin ruthlessly shooting the prisoners trying to flee. Unable to stand by and watch, James grabs a rifle and opens fire, cutting down several guards to spark a full-scale revolt among the captives, who fight back with whatever they can find. Amid the brutal fighting, James pushes forward, determined to end it, and storms into the command tent where Colonel Ito stands waiting, sword in hand, ready for their final duel. The two men face each other in a final, brutal hand-to-hand combat, and when it is over, Ito is defeated, leaving James standing over him, bloody, exhausted, but ultimately victorious. Gabriel quickly pulls James away from the battlefield, just as a soldier raises his rifle to shoot them in the back. In his final act of dark honor, Colonel Ito steps forward and lowers the weapon, silently allowing them to go. James and Gabriel race through the jungle until they reach the glider, just as American aircraft swoop past for their last attack run. As Japanese troops burst through the trees, the planes open fire, cutting down every soldier, including the young guard who had once shown James mercy. Amid the smoke and chaos, James grabs the tow cable, hooking it onto the glider just as a US plane swoops past, and the line catches, pulling the glider up and carrying them to the open sky. Years later, the film returns to 1950. James stands in the Ito Dojo, finally confronting the ghosts of his past with the general's disciples. He admits that he did not come for revenge, only for closure, but the senior student informs him that Ito died 2 years earlier, leaving James with nothing left to settle. With the confrontation over, James turns to leave, but the student stops him, handing back James's war medals that Ito had once stolen, and begs James to demonstrate the forbidden empty hand technique their master had spoken of. James refuses at first, unwilling to pass on a weapon of destruction, but when the student insists, James steps forward. His deadly fist stops an inch from the young man's face, a final, controlled display of lethal skill. Instead of striking, James lowers his hand and helps the student to his feet, a silent gesture of martial honor. Without another word, James turns and walks away, finally leaving behind the ghosts of war and his long, brutal journey for good.